I'm going to start with a story and then tell you a little bit about what I've learned recently about stories and how they can contribute to both peace and violence. And the story I have to tell, let me write down something. I have to have this board for that. Some of these names people don't usually catch the first time I pronounce them, so as to avoid confusion right off. My first story is about the people of Abkhazia. Just drop the K. Abkhazia and Kabardinia. These are two small ethnic regions tucked away in a forgotten paradise of the world in the Caucasus in the former Soviet Union. And these two ethnic groups are of the 130 to 50 or 200 ethnic groups, depending on how you're counting them, that were part of the former Soviet Union. So they were very small ethnic groups. The Abkhaz population in the former Soviet Union was never more than around 90,000. So don't feel bad that you've never heard of them. And if you have, I'm very, very amazed when I find that. So this story was told to me by an Abkhaz writer, fiction writer, was telling me about how he was doing what people in the Caucasus do a lot, sitting around a very heavy laden table with great food and wine and drinks. And people were toasting to each other, saying very nice, gracious things to each other over these toasts, long toasts. And one man stood up who was a Kabardinian and talked about how great it was that these two people were meeting together and representing both peoples and saying, and you know, we may actually be relatives. And this begins the story that this writer told me about how there had been quite a bit of violence between Abkhaz and Kabardinians sometime in the 1700s, when both communities decided if they kept going, these are regions with a culture of blood revenge. That is, family members are committed, obligated rather, to take revenge against any dishonor or violence committed against their family. And so because of these traditions, they both understood that they had the potential to wipe each other out over this conflict that occurred. And so what they decided to do to stop the violence was not unusual for these cultures, but what was unusual about it was the scale of it and the particular poignancy of the act. That is, they identified young women with young infants, small infants, on both sides, in both communities, who were brought up to a hillside, and they were blindfolded. They were cuddling their children, and at a certain designated moment, they were to cross over and exchange babies and never know where their own infant went, as a way to make these two communities related so that they could never, ever fight again. It's hard for me to tell this story without getting teary-eyed. I'm a mother myself, and I can't imagine what it would take for me to make such a sacrifice for the sake of peace. And to know that this would be the ultimate solution to a very, very difficult situation. Well, in the Caucasus, working as an anthropologist, a cultural anthropologist, collecting gossip, as I say, to people. When you study contemporary society as an anthropologist, you're collecting interesting stories about how people experience and see the world and give meaning to it. And I was fascinated by story after story like this, about how, you know, it only took a woman's to take off her scarf and to throw it into the middle of the fray between two men fighting, or a battlefield where two sides are fighting, for the fighting to end instantly. No negotiation here, it's like final. Or a situation where blood revenge had kept going on and people saw again the potential to have their own family wiped out, a feud going on too much. I actually found that these situations, these feuds wouldn't go on and on and on, in fact, because they had these mechanisms to stop them. Our notion of blood revenge is that, you know, these are people who are very barbaric and they're always killing each other. And actually, in all my studies of where blood revenge is practiced, traditionally, it's usually such quickly this mechanism goes into, this conflict resolution mechanism goes into effect. And another thing in the Abkhaz communities that I was told is, if someone feuding on the other side expected the next strike to be on their family side against them, they would try to figure out how to get close enough to an extended family member, anybody, you know, who was somehow related to this family with whom they were feuding, get close enough to either pick up a baby and have it be put very symbolically to the breast of any woman in their group, and that would end the fighting. Again, this relatedness. The child would not even have to take the breast. It would just be the symbolic taking of milk from the other side, and therefore the saying among these peoples is that milk is much stronger than blood. And so milk relationship is one where you could never have milk siblings fighting each other. You might have blood siblings, but not milk siblings. That's just the ultimate end to any conflict. Again, this relatedness. And I could go on and on, but I won't with those stories, but you get the idea, and you probably can imagine how I, at the age of 30, a young mother, a single mother, already married and divorced, living in the Soviet Union, in this exotic place, being an anthropologist, kind of stuck in the field there, how this could stir in me. And by the way, a child of the 60s, I was around 30, and so I had always dreaded that 30 because, you know, you weren't supposed to trust anyone over 30 in those days. And so that's where my journey began, or anyway, where I want to begin my journey talking to you about the lessons I've learned along the way, the personal lessons, as well as how I've seen how I've gone back and forth noticing the personal in the international and the international conflict in the personal, and how we're just talking about bigger, more complicated conflicts when we're talking about the international, but there's so much, as I probably don't need to tell this crowd, that comes from the intrapersonal, and that's starting with the self and working out certainly